John had been living on the ranch for nearly 2 years, since the day his wife had passed away, leaving him alone with their infant daughter Lily, and each day had been a test of endurance and quiet perseverance. He rose before dawn to tend to the cattle and fix the fences and feed the animals, and though the work kept his hands busy, it never filled the emptiness in his chest, nor did it replace the sound of his wife's laughter echoing through the rooms that now seemed too large for just the two of them. He carried Lily close to him, always, because she was all he had left, and the soft weight of her in his arms reminded him of the love that had once filled the house. And as he moved from the barn to the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast, he often found himself staring out at the vast expanse of land that rolled away into the horizon, where the fields met the sky. And in those quiet moments he remembered the promise he had made to himself to keep going for her sake, to raise her strong and happy, even if it meant carrying a sorrow that never seemed to lift. The wind whispered across the plains and stirred the dry grass, making it sway like waves on a sea. He watched the sun rise slowly, painting the world in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment he felt the weight of grief lift just enough to let a small sense of peace settle over him before it was replaced again by the ache of solitude. He remembered the first night he had carried Lily home from the hospital. The way her tiny fingers curled around his own, and the soft cries that had filled the car on the way back. He had promised her that he would always be there, and now every day was a continuation of that promise. The house creaked and groaned, as if remembering the people who had once filled it, and sometimes he would speak aloud to Lily even if she could not answer him, yet telling her stories about her mother, about the way she had loved to dance in the kitchen, and the way she had hummed as she worked. And even though tears threatened to fall, he held them back because Lily needed strength in the same way he needed it, and the routine of the ranch gave him a sense of purpose, because there was always something that required attention. Whether it was mending a broken fence, repairing a leaky roof, or calming a restless calf, he moved with careful deliberation, making sure Lily was safe and warm as he went about his day, and the chores that might seem endless to anyone else were the only thing that kept the emptiness from swallowing him completely. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows shortened, and still he worked with quiet determination, his eyes scanning the horizon, constantly aware that the world beyond the ranch might be unforgiving and lonely, but he had built his life here with sweat and patience, and he would not let it slip away. He prepared a bottle for Lily and rocked her gently in the chair by the window, letting the sunlight fall across her small face. And for a moment he allowed himself to imagine her growing up happy and free with the ranch as her playground, and the love of a father who had carried her through the worst night of his life. And as the wind carried the distant sound of a hawk calling across the plains, he felt the first hint of a new day settling over him. And though grief was never far, he knew that he and Lily would face it together, finding small moments of joy in the routine of life on the ranch and in the quiet, enduring bond between father and daughter. The knock at the door came suddenly like a sharp crack in the otherwise calm night, and John froze for a moment, his hand stilling on the cradle as Lily whimpered softly in her sleep. He listened again. The sound came once more, hesitant, yet insistent, and the wind howled outside, rattling the wooden panels of the house, making the shadows dance across the walls. He set Lily down gently in the crib and moved toward the door, each step careful as his heart thudded in his chest. He peered through the small window and saw a figure standing in the dark, soaked from the rain. The outline of a woman blurred by the sheets of water that ran down her coat and hair. Her presence was both alarming and oddly compelling, and for a moment he hesitated, caught between instinct to protect and the ingrained sense of decency that had always guided him. He opened the door slowly. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and the distant tang of the river. He stepped back just enough to allow her to enter, her eyes wide and searching, and when she spoke, her voice was soft, trembling with exhaustion or fear. He could not tell immediately. She said only that she needed shelter for the night, and he noticed the way her lips quivered, as if she had been crying or had endured some hardship. And though he wanted to question her more deeply, he sensed a vulnerability that demanded compassion. He closed the door behind her and motioned her toward the fireplace where the flames had burned low and cast a warm glow across the room. She sank into a chair, shivering, and John moved to fetch a blanket from the cupboard. He draped it around her shoulders and offered her a cup of warm tea. The steam curled up and mingled with the scent of rain and smoke, creating a fragile bubble of comfort in the dark room. She accepted it with a nod and a faint smile, and as she sipped, he noticed how carefully she watched him, how her eyes seemed to take in the details of the ranch, the furniture, the way the crib was tucked into the corner and a lump formed in his throat, as he realized that in all the years since his wife had died, he had rarely welcomed anyone inside this house that had become a fortress of solitude. He asked her gently who she was and why she had come this far, and she hesitated, her fingers tightening on the cup, before she said she had lost her way and had nowhere else to go. And John believed her, because something in the raw honesty of her presence resonated with the emptiness he had carried for so long. And as Lily stirred in her crib, he lifted her gently into his arms, and she reached for him instinctively, and the stranger watched with a soft expression that softened the lines of her face, and in that moment the house felt less lonely, and the storm outside seemed to pause in recognition of the fragile human connection that had formed across the threshold. The night stretched on with the rain tapping steadily against the windows, and John felt a cautious hope that perhaps this unexpected visitor could bring a sense of warmth and light to the house that had known only grief and silence. The night deepened, and the storm continued to lash against the walls of the ranch, but inside the house a quiet tension had settled, as John and the stranger moved carefully around each other, and yet there was a strange comfort in their presence. He set Lily down on the rug where she crawled toward the warmth of the fire, while he kept one eye on her and the other on the woman who now introduced herself as Anna. Her clothes were damp and clung to her frame, and her hair fell in loose strands across her face. But there was a resilience in her that drew him in and made him forget for a moment the ache of loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long. They talked in low voices, sharing fragments of their lives. The words, tentative, at first like stepping stones across a river, neither sure of the footing, but each willing to risk the other. And John found himself laughing quietly at something Anna said, a sound that surprised him with its ease and warmth, and Anna seemed to respond to the softness in him with her own gentle humor and openness. The storm outside seemed to fade in comparison to the storm of emotions inside the house. Curiosity, caution, and a growing sense of trust weaving together into an invisible thread that bound them despite the brevity of their acquaintance. Yet even in this budding connection there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. John wondered why she had come, why she had chosen his isolated ranch, and Anna could see the shadows behind. His eyes the careful watchfulness of a man who had been hurt and who had learned to guard himself fiercely. And as Lily gurgled and reached for a toy on the floor, they both watched her in silence. The baby was a bridge between them, a reminder of love that endured, and of responsibilities that demanded courage. Anna reached out instinctively to touch Lily's hand, and the small gesture was met with a tentative smile from John, and in that instant the tension eased slightly, and the room felt warmer, as if the fire had grown stronger with the heat of human connection. Yet there was still a sense of suspense. The unspoken questions hung between them like the dark clouds outside waiting for revelation or resolution, and John found himself wondering if this encounter was a fleeting happenstance or the start of something that might shift the course of his life. Anna spoke of being lost on the road of life in more ways than one, and John realized that her vulnerability mirrored his own hidden fears of inadequacy and loneliness, and the shared understanding between them was almost palpable. He felt a strange compulsion to protect her, not just from the storm outside, but from the unseen storms she carried within, and Anna seemed to recognize the silent promise in his eyes that she could trust him for the night at least. And as the wind rattled the windows and the rain painted streaks along the glass, they fell into a rhythm of quiet conversation and small gestures of care. And the isolation that had once defined the ranch felt less like a prison and more like a haven, a place where the world outside could wait, where the two of them could exist in a fragile bubble of safety and connection. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, John felt a tentative hope bloom inside him that perhaps the night held the possibility of change, of healing, and of the unexpected warmth that comes when strangers meet and find that they are not so different after all. The storm outside grew fiercer, the wind howling through the cracks in the walls and rain slamming against the windows as if demanding entry. And inside the house, John felt a surge of protectiveness. He held Lily tightly against his chest and moved closer to Anna, who had been pacing restlessly by the fireplace, her eyes wide with worry and fear. And just as he was beginning to think the night could settle into calm, there came a sudden crash from the barn, the sound of wood splintering and an animal screaming, and John's heart jumped into his throat. He moved instinctively toward the door with Lily in his arms, and Anna followed without hesitation. Together they stepped into the fury of the storm, the wind whipping against their faces, and the rain soaking them to the bone, and in the darkness John could barely make out a figure attempting to pry open the barn door. A shadowy intruder drawn perhaps by the isolation of the ranch and the vulnerability of the night. His grip on Lily tightened, and Anna reached for his arm, steadying him as he shouted to scare the stranger away. But the figure did not relent, and John realized they would have to act quickly or risk disaster. He remembered the shotgun above the mantel and swung back into the house, retrieving it while Anna comforted Lily, whispering soothing words, and the baby's cries subsided slightly in the warmth of her voice, and John returned to the barn door, aiming carefully and shouting. Again, the intruder froze for a moment and then retreated into the darkness, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The adrenaline left John's body in a wave of relief and exhaustion, and Anna breathed heavily beside him, her hair plastered to her face and her clothes clinging from the rain, but there was a spark of triumph in her eyes, and John felt a strange gratitude for her presence, for her courage and calm in the face of danger. As they returned to the house, he closed the door firmly and bolted it, checking the locks twice. While Anna wrapped a dry blanket around Lily and sang softly to her, the baby nestled against her chest, and John watched them both with a mixture of awe and tenderness, realizing that the night had tested them in ways they had not anticipated, and that the connection forged in the midst of fear had strengthened a bond that neither could ignore. The fire crackled in the hearth once more, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and outside, the storm began to ease just slightly, and John felt a deep sense of relief that they had weathered the danger together. And as he looked at Anna and Lily, he knew that the night had changed everything. The fear and uncertainty had given way to trust and understanding, and he understood, for the first time in many months, that he was not alone, that he had someone by his side who had proven herself brave and compassionate. And as the wind continued its distant howl over the plains, he allowed himself to feel hope, a fragile hope that perhaps this encounter was the beginning of something enduring, a new chapter where fear could be faced together and love could slowly find its place once more in the heart of the ranch that had known only grief and solitude for too long. Morning arrived slowly over the ranch. The storm finally spent its fury, leaving a soft drizzle that painted the fields in glistening green and gold, and inside the house the warmth of the fire and the soft scent of drying wood filled the air. John held Lily in his arms as she stirred awake, her eyes blinking sleepily against the light that filtered through the windows, and Anna sat nearby sipping the last of the tea, the quiet of the morning wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. And For the first time in many months, John felt a sense of peace that was not tinged with sorrow. He looked at Anna and saw the same relief mirrored in her eyes, the night's dangers now behind them, leaving only gratitude and the fragile beginnings. Of trust, he spoke softly, telling her that she was welcome to stay as long as she needed, and Anna smiled faintly, a smile that carried the weight of her own past struggles and a hint of hope for the future together. They moved through the house, tending to the small chores that gave rhythm to the morning, feeding the animals, checking the fences, and making breakfast, and Lily crawled between them, her laughter filling the space with a lightness that had long been absent, and John felt the unusual warmth of a home alive with more than routine. The bond that had begun in the shadow of the storm grew stronger with every shared glance and every small act of care, and as they worked side by side, he realized that the presence of another adult who cared for both him and Lily made the ranch feel less like a place of isolation and more like a sanctuary. The air smelled fresh with rain, and the earth seemed renewed, and he found himself telling Anna about his wife, about the dreams they had shared and the life he had imagined before tragedy had struck, and Anna listened with patience and empathy, and shared stories of her own journey of loss and resilience, and as the sun climbed higher, painting the fields in golden light, the two of them laughed at small mishaps in the kitchen and whispered encouragements to Lily as she tried to stand on wobbly legs, and in that moment John understood that the night's events had not just been an interruption, but a turning point. A moment when fear had given way to courage, when strangers had become allies, and when the possibility of love had begun to creep quietly back into his life. He felt a tentative hope blossom in his chest, a hope that he could provide Lily with more than survival, that he could offer her a life filled with laughter and warmth, and perhaps with time a new family of sorts would take shape. And as Anna reached out to take a plate from his hands and Lily clapped her small hands in delight, John realized that the ranch was no longer just a place of work and memories, but a home alive with the potential for joy, connection, and beginnings. And in the gentle morning light, with rain dripping from the eaves and the soft cries and coos of his daughter, John allowed himself to believe that the future could hold more than grief, that it could hold love, resilience, and the quiet happiness of having someone by his side to share it all.